especially, our families become very disconnected from the blackness in our lives, and as you all know, it's looked down upon, and I think that we need to really reclaim and realign ourselves with our blackness, and we need to remember that, you know, that we are connected. So, you know, when I was a teenager here in California in 1994, something happened that really changed my understanding of politics, but also of culture. And that's that in 1994, Clinton passed NAFTA, right? And here was this promise that said that there was no borders for free market capital, right? There was no borders, there would be something called free trade. And yet that same year is the year that the US-Mexico border was built. And so think about the concept of how capital is more important than human beings. Because where capital goes, humans should be able to go as well. Workers should be able to go. And that same year in '94, I mean, it was a bad year. It was not also the death of affirmative action. Right here, Ward Connerly, man out of here, one of the regents, killed affirmative action. And it was also the year that 187, Proposition 187 was introduced. And so if you wonder, well, how did this whole phenomenon around states passing anti-immigrant legislation start? It began here, and it began with Governor Wilson, and so places like Arizona followed. And these were this really shaped my own understanding of what it meant to be a family, someone in a mixed status migrant family, because what you saw on TV were these images of men running across the border or people in trunks, and you had this concept called illegal that began to be circulated in mainstream culture in the news. And so right away, when you call someone an illegal, you are labeling them as a criminal, right? And so if we wonder today why we are at a time when there's over 1,000 deportations a day, President Obama has deported over 2 million migrants, right? And we're in a time where immigrants make up the largest growing prison population. It's because the anti-migrants beat us in a cultural concept. And so culture matters. People vote according to unconscious bias and cultural ideas that they may have. Whether that's how they view relationships or love and who they think is entitled to have a relationship that's recognized, or how they view girls, or how they view you and your rights. All of these things are informed by what they see around them. And as a result, we need to remember that we can also create culture. In fact, culture, and art specifically, is a very important tool in our movements. And I think that often we think of art and we think of something that's cute and something that's nice. But we don't understand that art is actually fundamental. It's indispensable. Culture is. This is one of my earlier pieces. It's called Raw, and on the left I'm wearing white, and I'm looking at myself in the mirror, and really this white symbolizes the whiteness that I grew up with. I mean, to this day, when was the last time you saw a film with a protagonist, a central protagonist, that was a black woman, a Latina woman? I think maybe that's in Selena, right? And that's horrible that we're so used to watching films and you know, blockbuster films where the majority of people are white. Their stories are these multidimensional stories are mostly of white people, and yet where are our stories, right? And do you wonder why it is that you form a consciousness of yourself that doesn't fully see you as human when you don't see yourself reflected? That's how it was when I was growing up, and for me art became a way to love myself, right? And whiteness, not only as in seeing, you know, the image of a white woman held up as the standard of beauty, but also whiteness because I grew up in a Latino family and in a culture where virginity was something that was valued. And that when you turn on the novelas, there's only, in the spectrum of what you can only be a virgin or a whore, right? The good wife or the evil, bad one that the man cheats with, because the man can do anything he wants in the novela, right? But he often, the person, I would always be like, wow, the woman that's having the most fun is actually this bad girl, right? She's like, she's badass. So in this piece, I'm connecting with my blackness, and also all these things that people think are dirty or inappropriate, that I'm that, and to really say that I'm raw and myself. This is another one of my works. In a lot of my work, I work in an intersectional way, which looks at racism, feminism, environmental destruction, because really, you know, art is by default intersectional. When we think of organizing, we often are issue-based, about, we're just working in food justice, or we're working in racial justice, or education. In reality, all of our lives are impacted by many things, right? From what we eat to how much your student debt is, that's going to be crippling for many of you, to the decisions that they make about abortion. All of these things are connected, and so we need to find ways to continuously share them as connected and not as silos. And to think about this in a way, in a theoretical way, is that social change happens in three ways, with three elements. And political, you all know that we need laws to protect us. We need those corrupt bankers who stole from many people in this country to go to jail. We need laws that uphold our human rights. At the same time, we won't get laws until we get a cultural shift. People will not vote for something until they believe it. In 1997, Ellen DeGeneres came out, right? And after that, you had Will and Grace, you had Rachel Maddow, and now you have black men coming out on the cover of Sports Illustrated. This was a 15-year cycle, right? You could not have a black man come out on the cover of Sports Illustrated in the 90s. It just was not going to happen. So think about what it took to have a victory at the Supreme Court level, a policy victory. It took years and years of cultural interventions that happened on your TV or in the streets or in music. And so people first have to change their mind. And then, of course, systemic. We need systems to reflect this. Another way to look at this is thinking about action and ideas. Often, many of us are stuck in this space of action. And what I mean by that is that we go to rallies, we say we got to call Congressman so-and-so, or we got to go hit up the regents, or we got to go shut this place down. And we're moving with a lot of urgency because we have to. I mean, honestly, we are up against a corporate machine in every way you look at it. You are up against patriarchy. And so what we have is our people power. We don't have capital necessarily. We don't have the ability to lobby as much as we should, but we have people power, and so we become, through our labor, the people on the front lines. Now, the thing though is that we can't be stuck there. And often I feel that we are the no people, right? We're about no to this, no to that. And I invite you to think about what the yes looks like, right? What is the world that you envision? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Because often, I don't like the word struggle. I think that why are you going to tell people to come join a struggle? Who wants to be struggling? What about having fun? I mean, the reason we do this work is so that people can have quality lives, so that they don't have to be just working 60, 70 hours a week, and so that they can actually have time to love, to be with their families, to be in relationships that they value, any kind of relationship. And so why do we fail to look at the yes? And specifically with artists, I think, I would go through this all the time where I would need to go spend time in my studio, and people would say, oh, you're not down, you're not in the front lines, and I'm sure that we shame each other for that, and yet we forget that we need long-term work. We actually need to step away from the urgency of things and begin to think about what world we want to build. Unless you're building alternatives too, then our work is not sustainable. We have to think about what is for me, the values that I love, whether it's, about being in a gender-free world. Well, what does that look like? Why don't you write a comic about that, a novel, a song, music? And so now I'm going to delve into the work that I do specifically in three areas, and I'm going to talk about the first one, migrant rights. Growing up in a migrant family, I remember in the 90s and up until early 2006, that you would not come out about your status, and that status was something that was kept on the DL. And in 2010, there was a movement of undocumented students throughout the country, and it began, by just a few places throughout the country that said that they were undocumented and unafraid. And I thought this was so powerful because, as someone who has studied Harvey Milk and understands the power of our storytelling, I was like, wow, coming out of the shadows, in reality, it's from being unseen to being seen. And as an artist, it's all about what you see, right? The world that you can see is your reality. And so I was just so moved by this that I was like, man, this is actually a lesson in life, to share all of our experiences and to be authentic in order to make space for others. And so in the work, in my work around migrant rights, I talk a lot about deportations. This piece is called 22%, and it's about the fact that 22% of people deported in the United States are parents of U.S. citizen children. And so the fact that we're breaking up families is a reflection of how white supremacy looks at who deserves to be in a family and who doesn't, and what children deserve to have their parents and who doesn't. And you know, and as someone who always thinks about the yes, I always wondered, you know, we're reacting to a negative perception of who a migrant is, right? We're saying, no, we're not criminals. But think about what it takes to migrate. My mom migrated here when she was 17, and my mom got up one day and realized she didn't want to grow up, continue being in Peru, in a place where the only job she could get was a secretary, and that she would have to put her photo on an application in order to even get a job in a clerical space. And so she left, and she didn't go back for about 27 years. And so many times when people migrate, first, the majority of migrants are women. Second, many, you know, the journey, especially from Central America, but the journey getting into the United States, you are 80% likely to be raped. Okay, so it's not that somebody leaves just decides one day I want to leave. Imagine the courage it takes for you to get up one day and realize you have to ride on top of a train for over 50 days and face off with narcos and corrupt police, and then at the border you may die from heat exhaustion. That is the ultimate symbol of survival and human dignity. And I think that we forget that our migrant parents are our heroes, and why don't we begin to frame the conversation we have around beauty, resilience, and courage. And that's what I do in the work around Migration is Beautiful, is to reframe through the symbol of a monarch butterfly, because the monarch butterfly is the longest traveling insect in all of its species. A monarch butterfly goes from Mexico through the United States and Canada. And also to have fun, to wear costumes, you know, to do street art, because again, being in the know gets old, and we need to find ways, especially for young people, children, to begin to see themselves in positive ways and see their families. Next is the rights of Mother Earth. Now, you know, I think when people think about, when I was growing up and coming up in the organizing space, I remember that people said, oh, you know, environmentalism, that's such like a white thing. Well, you know, the majority of pollution and dirty water and toxic waste is in our neighborhoods. I mean, do you remember growing up just seeing McDonald's and Jack in the Box and only seeing fast food? The number one killer in our community, the number one reason why Black and Latino folks die is because of food-related diseases. Okay, so think about the fact, especially Latinos, that many of our people are feeding this country, literally. They're in the meat industry, they're in the slaughterhouses, they're picking the fruit, and yet we die from it because of what we eat. And so, to me, there's a direct connection between feminism and environmentalism. And that is because what patriarchy will do to the earth, it will do to women. There is a lot of alignment there. If you begin to think about that in the 1600s, for example, when science was developed, some of the earliest scientists, you know the way that they defined science, they said that it was value-free. That's a lie. Science is not value-free. Science, what it did is repress feminine knowledge. And I don't like to use feminine and masculine as a dichotomy. I'm just using it as a way to express the values. But they suppressed and murdered witches who were the holders of knowledge, women. It was a whole campaign. And what Sir Francis Bacon said, he said, science is not merely a gentle guidance over nature's course. We have the power to conquer and subdue her and shake her foundations. And so we have to understand that we are connected to our mother. We are, just like the mother has cycles, we have cycles as women. And that we need to uphold and protect this, because this is our only home. And that we need to really think about it through a feminist lens, and especially through a feminist women of color lens, because our communities are most affected. I'm going to just kind of brush through some of these, but you know, when I was growing up, and even to this day, in your high schools, or some of you are in high school, actually probably even on your campus, people walk around with what? Hot Cheetos, soda, all this stuff that is creating a diabetes crisis in our community, right? And killing us, killing our kids. And that's with fast food, with this junk that's going to ultimately affect us, right? Kill us. And what would it be like to see black men walking around with fruits and vegetables and kale? And why not create that reality, right? And also thinking about that this is, think about the words we use in describing what we're going through. Climate change. It's not climate change, it's a crisis. And so I'm going to actually have to skip through some of these because I want to get to the best part of this presentation before I run out of time. So here's some of my work. I'm really passionate about supporting moms with helping their kids eat better. I think that the way we eat is a direct choice and reflection of our values, because you know what? Think about who's making that food and think about how much they're profiting from the death of people you love. So the final thing that I'm going to talk about is right to body autonomy and rights and sexual justice. And I don't like to call it reproductive justice because not all of us want to reproduce, and that's not all that is about our body. There's a lot more to our body than just the fact that a baby can come out. So before I start on this section, which is the final section, I want to remind you of some things. And first is that as an artist, you have a lot of permission and a lot of space to do things that are very hard to do in other things. So first, you can be controversial. Some of the work I'm going to show you is very controversial. You can be visionary, again, not just reactive, but visionary, and that we can talk about our values. Because I think often we get stuck in thinking, is it about our right to abortion or not our right to abortion? Is it about our right to birth control or not? Right? And it's not, that's actually only a symptom of a root way of thinking, right? And so I'm interested in what is these root ways of thinking. So in 2011, we saw the beginning of the war on women. And much of this war played out in states with with strong people of color populations like Texas. And so what happened? Well, the anti-abortionists introduced over 1,000 pieces of legislation. Not all of them passed, but 1,000 pieces. Do you know how many pieces of legislation were introduced by the pro-choice side in that time? Two. So just so you know what it means to be reactive, we are in a space where we're just fighting a war we can barely cut through. And so we need to think about not just being on the defensive. But at that point, I realized that... So at that point, for me, I said, you know what? We need to stop just talking about things in pro-choice and really get down to the fact that this is about our body autonomy, okay? And this is about us having governance over the one thing that can change our lives drastically. Contraception is the thing that allowed there to give women a choice so that they could focus on other things and be things like scientists, policymakers. You understand, contraception is really a key to women's liberation. And so if you wonder why there's a war on contraception, it is because that is how we're going to gain power. When there is more contraception available to women around the world, we will be able to have the freedom to live life on our terms, and not on the terms dictated to us by the state. So in my work, when I was in high school, I would always get slut-shamed, So I was in high school and I would get slut-shamed because I hung out with all the bad girls. And I also hung out with young women who were victims of sexual abuse, and that got turned around on them and they were called sluts. You know that today there's a lot of young women around the country who are committing suicide because they're slut-shamed, because there was a moment when that young woman might have been curious, or she might have wanted to do something, and she trusted someone, and she decided to have sex with him, and then next thing you know, there's videos around her. So at the core of what we're talking about is that there is a misperception around women's sexuality. And women's sexuality is heavy policed, heavily moralized. What is exactly a slut? I mean, what makes someone a slut? Well, I began to ask that question, and I thought, a slut is someone who has a lot of sex. Well, you know what? there's nothing wrong with that. A slut is someone who, maybe has a lot of partners and is not committed to anyone. There's also nothing wrong with that. And so what I'm trying to do is for us to think about what are these key concepts, and really, why should women's sexuality be so policed and so governed? If you wonder why we have a rape crisis at universities, it's because the way that young men, the way that patriarchy teaches us about sex, creates a power dynamic that we can then not break. So we need to begin to think about, how are we taught about sex? What are the messages that we get? When I was 21 years old, one of the reasons why I said I didn't graduate from UC Berkeley, why I was here but I didn't graduate, is because I got pregnant at 21 years old. And I was involved in ethnic studies strikes. We were doing the hunger fast right there in front of, I forget some of these buildings, but it was right here. It was I was here 96 through 99. And I fell in love, I think that's what happened. And then I got pregnant. And when I told my partner that I got pregnant, he was out. Like, he disappeared. And the reason that I share that is because even though I was a 4.2 student and I got so many scholarships to come to UC Berkeley, I was like in the Mesa Academy, Saturday Engineering Academy, after school, math, I was doing it all. And yet, my parents had never talked to me about love or relationships or sex. And so what happened is I had a very messed up perception of what I thought I deserved in a relationship. And I, made so many mistakes. And so the reality is that the problem was that there was silence around sex. In other words, sex was kept in the shadows. When you keep something in the shadows, it begins to rot. You don't have information about what you need. I remember also going to Catholic school, and what the things that we were taught is that only that we have a vagina, and the vagina is that large hole right there. You know what? The vagina is only one part of our vulva. Okay, there's only one part, and there's other parts. There's a urethra and there's a clitoris, which is actually one of the only organs for stimulation. There's many folks who don't even know that's there. And so in the work that I do, I have a project and it's called the Pussy Power Imaginary. And what that is, and what this is that we don't need to just be focused on the no. We need to be focused on the yes. And what the yes is that how do girls grow up? Think about what you needed in order so that you could have full autonomy, full decision making. You were in a place where you could negotiate exactly what you want. And I think most of the stuff out there when it comes to romance films and all these really continues to put women in very passive places. Not to mention that it's all about monogamy, it's all about one kind of relationship, and if you don't get that relationship, you're wrong. If you're a single woman at 40, you must be like, something's wrong with you. And so instead, why don't we re-envision what love looks like? We need to have a conversation that starts with our pleasure, because liberation is something we need to embody. And what better way to embody liberation than to know about our bodies, know what we like? How are we able to ask someone to give us what we like when we haven't explored that? There's hardly any spaces for us to explore that. In the art that I do, I'm all about helping people also reimagine the pussy as a very amazing symbol of power. Because you know what? We live in a male-centric world where everything is phallic and everything reflects this ingrained notion of patriarchy where men's desires are up here and we are just in service to that. And so how do we break that so that it becomes about us and our desires and our needs in a way where we can be whatever we want, where it's not, you're a virgin over here, you're a hoe over here, but there's a whole spectrum that allows you to explore and to really, get what you need in love and in relationships and in sex. I think often we're like, well, we shouldn't, my parents were like, we shouldn't talk about that, it's bad. Oh, your vagina, it bleeds, bad. Close your legs, put barbed wire around it. It's just, I have to say, that is such a skewed way for us to learn about our bodies, and it stays with us till we're adults. It stayed with me, and so even though I was out there in the front lines, my concepts around sex and relationships were completely just broken. So I encourage encourage you to think about this and to think, I love, this is an art activity I did with some young women. I love that it says here, read it, memorize it, love it, right? You gotta memorize that. You gotta memorize what you like. You gotta learn about it, read it like a book. And finally, I'll close out with this, is that ultimately, we have to think about what's gonna get our girls liberated, so that our girls grow up in a society where they don't have to be thinking about, being a little princess, right? Like I see these films like Frozen, and I'm like, God, this is just indoctrinating this princess idea that all we need to do is be these little pretty dainty flowers that never, really get ours, and that we're always very passive agents. And so for me, changing culture is so that girls can grow up in a world where anything is possible for them, and that they are going to be ass kickers, they're going to change the world, we're going to save the planet, climate change is going to stop, and there will be economic equality for all. So thank you so much, everyone.